When we thought about the year ahead, the first thing that struck us is that no one expects a normal year anymore, right? No one expects traditional outcomes. So at Faculty Change, we never deal in predictions. For that, you go to Polymarket or Kalshi. What we're doing here is sharing observations on what is already happening. There are patterns gaining momentum that will define not just 2026, but the years ahead. These are the themes to understand when making strategic investments and decisions about the future of your business. We're facing many major challenges as a society, and we don't expect anything to be resolved in the near term. Rather, these are conditions that will persist and evolve. What's going to be interesting and profound is the way that individuals and organizations adapt to these challenges. And really, that's what we're here to discuss, because understanding these shifts enables you to take advantage of those opportunities that change creates. So if you're not familiar with Faculty of Change, we work with established market leaders to rediscover their relevance and identify new business insights to generate growth. So oftentimes that starts with a question: how do we maintain our long-term market position? Or are we feeling that we've lost our purpose or our sense of focus? Our value proposition isn't clear and our customers' lives have changed, that we need to change with it. If you're facing any of those challenges and you find this relevant, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to have a conversation about how we can support your business. Similarly, we do private briefings this as well. They're great kickoffs to innovation days, offsites, board days, etc. And they come in a whole bunch of formats. So happy to chat more about what that looks offline. In the full report, we have a set of 12 themes. Today, we will be discussing the 8 you can see here. So the core observation here is that all the major LLM and AI providers are losing money every time someone uses their product. We all know that, right? And that they're buying our loyalty by investing in the experience in a way that's not economically sustainable. And it's the early days of Google when they cared more about search quality than ad revenue. And I think we all remember, we can all see how the story went. Now you go to Google and you got to drop all the way to the bottom to find what you're looking for. And the monetization or the initiatification of these platforms is starting, right? They are at their peak usefulness. The models themselves may improve, and some of the technology tools may improve over time, but our access to them and the way in which we use them is going to start to change fundamentally. We're seeing ChatGPT inserting ads into its core product and Anthropic mocking them in commercials, but also really the incentives are starting to shift. Individuals are figuring out how to game the system. You're hearing more about agentic engine optimization and how do I get my company to appear in search results from these LLMs and AI tools. So if we're not at the crest of the hill, we are getting close to it. What we can expect is continued degradation of the experience of using these magical tools. Some early signals are the ad placement we spoke about. Ghiblification, making your images look like Studio Ghibli, became incredibly popular. And once it was popular, it was moved right behind the paywalls. There's a whole bunch of examples. Claude for Excel is widely available. It's a great tool. But Claude for PowerPoint now requires a Max subscription, and that's $200 a month. A lot of these things that people find joyous and reasons to use these tools are moving behind bigger paywalls. Disney IP is now only available on Sora, which is an OpenAI tool, but Sora is not also widely available either. And the challenge is that we're becoming more and more dependent on specific models in general or tooling related to these models. We're embedding it into our business process. We're using it to automate things that are core to what we do. And we're expecting the continued availability at the way that it has been made available to us. But that is unlikely to continue. The question being is how do we use AI now? How do we take advantage of the subsidy window? More importantly, how do we ensure that we don't become overly reliant on it as our competitive advantage when it is likely to not continue to materialize in the same way? Taking a hard left turn, affluence as aesthetic. When we think about advancing beauty technologies, new surgeries, topicals, peptides, it's really redefining what beauty is. For a long time, there's been a societal consensus on what's aspirational, and that's been reflected in beauty standards. Traditionally, in the Middle Ages, voluptuousness, the Rubenesque description, was considered desirable because it demonstrated access to resources and food. In the 20th century, this thinness, youthfulness, signaled moral virtue. And the goal was always to look virtuous. And so people really strive to look young and to possess this virtualness. But now, when you look at some of these aspirational personalities, they don't even look human anymore. all they look is wealthy. When we think of Martha Stewart, we think of Will Smith, these peptides, these buccal fat removals, these new facelifts, and we're calling it the third thing. They don't look right. They don't look conventionally attractive, but they don't look ageless, but they look timeless. They just look wealthy. And it's a reflection of the way in which society has moved to value wealth really, really differently. There's this influencer called Clavicular, who I don't know if you're familiar with. He's in his early 20s, and he is the resident looks maxing king. He's been taking hormones since he was 14 years old to look more attractive. And he's encouraging people to spend more money and time on their appearance because this new third thing, look, he thinks is more important than anything else. There's a lot of corresponding signals. One of the major ones that you're hearing more and more about these days is the rise of peptides. So these are research chemicals that a lot of people are buying through TikTok and Signal chats and Telegram chats. A very popular one is called Blue Wolverine, and it's a mixture of N80 plus and a couple others that supposedly reverses the effects of aging. It also reportedly accelerates cancer development in the body, but that's a tomorrow problem, not a today problem. When plastic surgeons used to aim for this conventional beauty aesthetic, there's been an increasing ask for the Mar-a-Lago face. So the idea is that the way in which people are interpreting beauty isn't tied to these conventional standards. It is much more about signaling either political affiliation or affluence, or political affiliation and affluence in the case of the Mar-a-Lago face. And then lastly, these new facelifts. Whenever you hear Renee Zellweger, Emma Stone, I don't want to call people out, but whenever you hear about celebrities getting a new face, which is a product of these new technologies, that is fundamentally changing the way they look. Again, they don't look as younger versions of themselves. They look fundamentally different. And what we're talking about now, and what we are then referring to it as, is the affluence aesthetic. And next, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Dylan, who's going to walk through neo-oral culture.
Thank you, Jared. So the next theme, neo-oral culture. So if you think about it, humanity's greatest technology accomplishment might be the shift from oral to written transmission of information, from storytelling based on the storyteller's memory and maybe their personal interpretation to that textual, objective, unchanging physical record when we started to write things down. And then later in time, when we developed the printing press, the ability to really distribute that information on a massive scale. What we're starting to see is signals of a reversal of this ancient shift. So from podcast consumption and the rise of voice memos versus text messages, I don't know about you all, but often the information I want these days is on YouTube. Someone's talking about it on YouTube. And I don't want to watch a 20-minute video. I want to scan a text. I'm really good at that. I want to pull the information out and I go looking for a transcript or whatever. And my kids think that's insane. I'm the CEO who's still printing out his emails, equivalent to maybe my generation. If that's you, no judgment here. But for them, why would you not want to watch the video and listen to it? So there's a real shift going on here. And it's also not just about convenience or multitasking. It's really a fundamental cognitive shift, because for millennia, we processed information orally based on story and emotion and seeing the communal response of everyone else who was listening together. And then for the last 500 years, with the development of print, that really rewired how we think for more linear logic and narrative, abstract reasoning. And if that's ending and starting to end, and it surely is, that has some profound implications. 3 early signals of this. First of all, we can see it quite clearly in how political authority is working. So whether that's from Trump's rally clips or Bolsonaro's silent TikToks compared to the written manifesto that used to get nailed to the door. No one's reading that thing anymore. The culture of politics today is oral, and people are getting their sense of truth from how they feel and from that sense of tribal belonging versus reading through all of the evidence. Podcasts, as I mentioned, continuing to grow. 55% of Americans have listened to one at least monthly. 55 plus age cohort is the fastest growing there. So this isn't just the youth culture thing either. And then voice notes, as I mentioned, are replacing text messages in some cases in your messaging app. Just the other day, someone sent me a voice message. It's new for me. I was like, what's this? I got to listen to it. Obviously, I'm a text preferer of that generation, but more and more that's happening. And not just personally, but at work, Slack is seeing a 46% increase in the use of voice notes on their platform. So writing took hold because of the ability for high fidelity reproduction, mass distribution. Now we have the technology to have that same fidelity of reproduction and the same reach, but with an oral form. And it looks like perhaps in some ways we're returning to the human default of voice and orality. The next theme is taking the long way. So many organizations over the last decade, you're probably familiar with this, customer experience, right? All these buzzwords, seamless, frictionless, touch points. But if you think about it, the idea of that aim of an experience that's so convenient and so rapid that it's almost non-existent. If you take it to the limit in a weird way, we're really aiming at no experience at all. And we're starting to see the counter reaction to that sort of logic. First of all, you can see it among the ultra wealthy. We always say that more than money, time is the ultimate luxury. And there's a growing sense that the ultimate status isn't saving time, much you don't save money. It's showing that you can spend it conspicuously, that you have it almost to waste. And among the very wealthiest, there's two camps emerging, those with time to spare and those who merely have a lot of money. You could think of Jeff Bezos. He's on what looks like permanent vacation now, right? Yacht parties, space tourism. And meanwhile, Elon Musk is sleeping in a factory and has no time, and he's striving for the next trillion, or the first trillion, I guess. Same net worth, but a very different aura and a very different status read that you get from those two different ways of looking at things. This notion of time as luxury, also democratizing. And this has been going on for some time now. You can think of the baking during the pandemic or raising something for 8 hours. That used to be a way for people who couldn't afford the good meat to turn the cheap cut into something edible. Now it's something that we do to enjoy ourselves and enjoy the ability to do that, to have the time walking instead of Ubering. All of this sort of stuff is pointing towards the emergence of a new type and a new era of conspicuous consumption of time. And the new flex here isn't zero friction, it's having time to waste. And the best experience isn't one that's gone in an instant, it's the friction that's the value. All of the value is in the friction. That's where the experience happens. And so focusing on getting rid of friction is a misstep. And really, it makes more sense to think about creating friction in the right way and in the right places, and in order to create an experience that's truly valuable and even luxurious. Some signals here. One is all-day dining. One of London's most discussed restaurants, the Yellow Bittern, is built around refusing to pander to customer convenience. Policies include things lunch will take at least 2.5 hours. The menu cannot be adapted to suit dietary requirements. Starting to see that one a lot more and more in high-end dining spaces. And in this case, also reservations in person. They have a phone number, but I'm not sure they answer it. The return to rail is another one. So this has been a slow burn for some time now. Travel agencies are reporting luxury rail bookings up 135% over the last 3 years, 41% just in the last year alone. So again, choosing to take a longer way and the friction and of being the experience, right? And then again, in the travel space, another interesting signal is calling living a local. So the days of racing across Europe to the next major city and major site every night and every hour, perhaps fallen by the wayside. People are choosing longer stays in one spot, locally integrated stays where maybe you're staying outside the core or in a smaller center. And so a really different way of thinking about where you're going and what you're trying to achieve. And that is the antithesis of speed, right? And so in some frictionless, it really appears to be in some ways on the way out as the ideal, the absolute ideal of no friction at all. What's taking its place is considered and intentional friction. And this can even apply to experiences that you might think of as needing to be fast and easy. How do you multiply the experience and its value instead of aiming to erase it entirely? Matthew, over to you.
So at the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum from the conspicuous, slow-moving leisure class are the Zylists. Zylism captures a shift from a feeling of shared economic anxieties to the solitary practice of building our own separate lifeboats. It really describes the apparent nihilism of Generation Z, where we're seeing young men shift to a hyper-individualized approach to unstable and uncertain economic and life conditions that are in fact shared by everybody, but they are facing it individually. So instead of turning to community, education, careers or professions, or traditional institutions, they're going all in on winning wealth for their own future while staying separate from other people. It's a fundamentally lonely enterprise. So this reaction to deteriorating opportunities is different between young men and women, obviously with exceptions, but largely women are following more traditional and institutional paths, college degrees and professional training, while men are leaning into high risk, high reward solutions. I'm not sure solutions is the best term there, honestly, but we're talking about things like crypto, sports betting, and stock speculation. And companies are already starting to cash in on this behavior. So you can see it in the rise and spread of wildly unregulated speculation and prediction markets, where even the invasion of Venezuela was something that people could bet on. This is all happening in isolation. These young men are being led from their bedrooms and their basements by influencers who are preaching male strength and the ascetic lifestyle. So there's an interesting sign of this shift to this sort of stark self-management ethos. You can just go to a local Indigo, check out the philosophy section. You'll find that the Stoics and the Neo-Stoics have taken it over. Marcus Aurelius has more or less become as dominant as Ruby Carr is for poetry. These young men are turning away from the values, restraints, and relationships that used to moderate the masculine ideal. And we might argue they're actually turning away from the American dream itself, right? That belief, and certainly for many, was only ever a belief that hard work and steady progress are what build your future. So they're leaving that to the women. It's a deliberate and artificial duality between the genders that they are rooting in their vision of prehistoric gender roles, with men off hunting woolly mammoths and taking risks while women tended and managed in the caves, I guess. Again, it's their vision. It's not an accurate archaeological depiction of things. But today, the guys are in the online casinos and they're in the prediction markets, while the women are seeking stability in academia and enterprises. So the result of this is a rise in entrepreneurship and things like stock ownership, but also in social isolation. There's been a concurrent drop in partying and dating. Now, the thinker and writer Derek Thompson is likening these young men to monks in a casino. It's kind of a beautiful image. They're striving for intense discipline and asceticism while going all in on risk, right? They're binge reading Seneca in between hands of online poker. It is a new combination of masculine forms, a sort of warrior ethic that distills masculine traits, and masculine is heavily bracketed there. Things like discipline, and it's pitting it against chaos in a sort of intensifying feedback loop between online influence on one hand and then in-world desperation on the other. So you can picture the looks-maxing influencer, Clavicular. He's advising young men to take out student loans and spend them on plastic surgery. He said it's well-advised misappropriation of funds. And that's being done with the vague hope that appearing sufficiently manly will help them triumph over their futures. It'll equip them to seize opportunities and give them wins far bigger, apparently, than a degree might. It is increasingly being seen as pathological, as something somewhat clinical. And that's maybe unsurprising given that some of these guys, especially Clavicular's followers, are breaking their own jaws with hammers to look more alpha. Some researchers have started talking about what they're calling young male syndrome, characterized by risky or overtly dangerous behaviors. And they're noting a link with relative poverty. That is relative, right? It's about a feeling of inadequacy relative to your local context. So it really can apply at different levels. And this suggests that this attitude to risk might compensate for perceived low status and limited options. And in fact, that compensation might in some ways be real. Whatever the downsides, there is a surprising link to reproductive success, measured, of course, by how many children they have rather than how well they're being raised. It's a good fit with their tendency to argue for pseudo-Darwinist principles and prehistoric gender norms, even if it may only be that risk-taking in general includes risk-taking sex and prophylactics. Now, if young men specifically are turning to this hyper-individualized asceticism and even to a pathological syndrome of risk-taking, it is happening with a broader cultural shift. There's a bigger thing at play here. A move towards ruggedness, old frontier values about the individual's strength in the face of apparently corrupting or decaying systems. So this is rooted in frontierism. It's an old ethos, a political and ideological system that set individualism against institutions in America's quest to conquer the West and its supposed pristine wilderness. And the essence of this fantasy was a hero's journey, a triumph over hardship that depended on man alone, a sort of vision that has defined the nation throughout its history. And certainly it enabled some bursts of greatness along the way, but it also justified criminality, oppression, and dispossession. Now, this has always been more of a touch point or ideal than an actual way of life for those who upheld it. And in fact, for a long time, it was considered outmoded, especially among social and cultural elites, except when they were using it as cosplay to justify their own politics. But it is returning and it's deepening, along with the rise of right-wing populism at home and abroad. This idea that life's harshness is not to be overcome together, but to be faced alone. It's a story about individual merit, not social safety nets, collective systems, inherited wealth or values, or anything else. And you can probably see how easily this lends itself towards the nihilism that I talked about earlier on, which applies more at the bottom of the social and economic ladder. Culturally speaking, there is a rising skepticism toward institutional expertise. There's a celebration of disruptive outsiders and the framing of struggle as such as the definition of leadership. And you can see this kind of everywhere, but just think of the hustle culture posts that you see on LinkedIn where people are talking about working 120-hour weeks as though that is the measure of leadership and success. At the furthest end, these have led to conspiracy theories, vaccine skepticism, trucker convoys, and other spectacular forms of self-degradation. We can expect the world to continue defining and dividing us along these lines. This frontier-like individuals on one side versus mainstream, traditional, or institutional on the other. And in fact, this is probably a perennial or even a permanent contrast in North American culture, a sort of lingering way to define ourselves against others who we see as either weak and entitled on the one side or selfish and reckless on the other. Since World War II, we did see things move one way towards collectivism and towards social supports. But since the 80s, we've seen it swinging slowly back. And now we're seeing that go further than ever before, further certainly than in most of our lifetimes, and bringing us closer than ever to that extreme end of rugged individualism. So there are signs of this everywhere. I will start by saying this is not just a response to events. It's also a prescription for the future, right? People think of this as a way to return us to a state of health, us being claimed as the way forward for America and its allies, especially on the online right wing. Anti-woke thinkers and influencers are suggesting that frontier values can sort of revitalize a Western world that they're now saying is soft and decadent, weak, captured by traditional elites. It's no longer a fringe position that can get you punched in the face depending on how and where you say it. The American government has been scandalizing European leaders, but they've been talking about things like immigration, Western civilization, white genocide, and the general softening of the continent. And all of this rings back not just to the 1930s, and we all know who I'm talking about, but to the manifest destiny of the 19th century. More innocuously, there's been an aesthetic shift that comes along with it, with cowboy boots being sold in Manhattan and Western wear retailers like Tekavas seeing considerable year-over-year growth. And you can imagine the difference between a New York City that once flooded the streets against George Bush, insulting him as a cowboy and a dumb rancher, and now one where people are paying hundreds of dollars to wear a Stetson hat in Times Square. Likewise with music, where those frontier values are probably most clearly distilled and spread. Country music has now surpassed hip hop and pop in the Billboard Top 100 charts, going from niche to mainstream popularity. But it's not just the rise of that specific genre against others, it's actually a change across all genres as well. So even ones like hip hop that people used to see as outright opposed to country music, you can see it in Post Malone or Lil Nas X. You can see Beyonce in her Levi's and cowboy hat. Our world may finally be ready for Bubba Sparks. Now, this might actually mean that some cultural worlds are becoming more inclusive, maybe blurring some racial lines while papering over some economic ones, but it's also certainly playing to a particular political base, bringing things together around this romance of the rugged American frontier. Now, there's also been another move against modern systems that sometimes rhymes with this return to ruggedness, but is, at least in most cases, about rights or ecological friendliness and even anti-capitalism. Think principled self-reliance or self-protection rather than romantic self-definition, even if those things can never be ever fully separated. It's about people getting a grip. Right? It's a move from an economy of convenience back to tangible ownership, the things that they depend on. Now, the modern promise, as we know, has been the democratization of ease, right? The always on, cutting edge, immediately convenient, on demand, and more opaque availability of everything from takeout steak tartare to IT infrastructure. For most people, today's world looks like clouds and not factories, and most of us haven't really wanted to know otherwise. But behind those clouds, of course, are the hard realities of data centers, networks, companies, economies, infrastructures, and then states. Falling asleep worrying about layoffs, or whether that comment that you made through Gmail is going to pass through an American server and you're going to be detained when you fly to Boston, or waking up to find that your oven no longer works or your bed no longer reclines because AWS is down, has people asking, how can we count on what we can't control? So they are now starting to think about what goes on behind the cloud. And as the hidden costs and risks become apparent, there is a growing move towards real ownership, from consumer services, products, and media to digital infrastructure and even national sovereignty over data. For consumers, the Netflix and the latest iPhone are seeding ground bit by bit, certainly, to upgradable tech like Framework or at-home media libraries. And for governments, concerns over privacy, security, and reliability are leading to investments in local and national cloud services. So we're seeing at all levels a move towards more control. Now, this is certainly a broad trend. You can see it, for example, in housing, with new financial arrangements and cooperatives allowing groups of friends to own together rather than rent separately. You can see it as well in food habits, where meal prepping for your week has gone from frugal to fashionable, while ordering all your meals through Uber Eats can get you roasted by your friends. It's a sign now of laziness or not having it together. But we can see it most clearly in tech and media. In the EU, there are new energy labels that include repairability scores. These enable consumers to increase their control over their own tech while reducing waste overall. And this follows on from the legislated right to repair and the EU mandate that the iPhone switch to USB-C as they standardized chargers. All of this has stemmed from growing public frustration with the cycle of tech replacement, the rhythm of it, warranties that were voided by repairs, and of course, an overarching sense of being locked out of what they've bought. Now, the same goes for films and music, where the ease and access of streaming services is now being questioned if it means having multiple subscriptions to things that are never truly yours. DRM and platform media were tolerable when they meant instant and almost free media. We all loved it at first, right? And in fact, illegal torrenting reached its low in 2020. But prices have gone up, services have fractured, and cherished films and series have disappeared entirely from online. So piracy has rebounded, not too surprising. It's being led in particular by Swedish 18 to 24-year-olds, which may be a bit more surprising, except Sweden is the home of the Pirate Bay. But it is also becoming more broadly mainstream. Right? Everyone I know talks about their Plex servers at home. That platform's making it easier to take back that control and control it from where you are. But there's also a spread of pirate memes online and people just openly, unhesitatingly talking about theft, essentially, or what's defined as theft. Now, in Canada, we're also seeing a move towards data sovereignty. So this is applying across the whole collective rather than just individuals. Part of Carney's priorities when creating the Major Projects Office was to establish sovereign cloud capabilities, right? Promoting digital independence. That's probably an obvious move at a moment like this, considering everything south of the border, but it's still one that folds into a broader shift that has seen similar moves at different levels, from the home servers I've mentioned up to companies like Animiiki, which specialize in building indigenous data sovereignty with specialized platforms for First Nations. And this can maybe remind us that it's not just about self-protection, right? It's also about a sense of justice and about autonomy.
Less food, more flavor. Here we're addressing one of the largest topics of conversation of the past year, which is GLP-1s. They just released a new Wegovy pill in the States, which is much more cost effective and doesn't involve the injections. So there's no issues of refrigeration, storage, sharps disposal. As well, in Canada, we're in the process of approving generic GLP-1s. So the cost is going to go down dramatically. The pill in the US is 150 a month as opposed to 500 a month for the injections. So in Canada, I think the injections are 250 a month. So you got to imagine the pill is, we're talking 60, $70 a month. And 17% of Americans have tried one of these. 20% of US households have at least one member currently on them. Going back to the Chinese peptide story, there's a research chemical called retroruchide that's coming. It's in FDA trials. It's supposed to be 3 times more effective than GLP-1s at inducing weight loss. So this wave is washing over us pretty quickly. We are not anything new there. But a fun stat about it for East dinner parties is that Business Insider, the online publication, polled tailors in New York City's financial district. So they used to very rarely take pants in, so make the waist smaller. The common operation was letting pants out. Now they're finding they've gone from 2 or 3 packets a month to 300 to 400 pairs a month that they are taking in, likely in response to the weight loss of the pant owners and wearers. And so what you're seeing is this shift. People are shifting their spend from sweets to protein because they want every bite to help them achieve their desired body and look. But also, manufacturers are following suit. There's protein in everything. I saw in Bon Appetit magazine this month an ad for Parmesan that said it has 6 grams of protein a serving. I never thought about Parmesan that way, and I don't think many of you have. But what you're going to start seeing is that food processors, the manufacturers of these food products, are going to start to maximize the experience of eating to compensate for reduced portion sizes and reduced consumption. Instead of small plates, expect small bites that are umami enhanced and extra flavor power. It's really this concentrated flavor bombs that are designed for reduced appetites, ushering in perhaps a new age of food science. People talk about the health risks of processed foods, but as people consume less and search for the same experiences that they had when they were consuming more, the only way to do that is through food processing. Even in Canada, we have 2 million plus Canadians that are on these drugs. And what they're seeing amongst higher income households, this is across North America, is an 8 to 10% drop in food spending once you start taking some of these. And as well, we saw originally the changes and shifts, the dining out. If people heard of the concept of girl dinner or martinis and fries, that there was these new ways of interacting with restaurants, originally adjusting for the increased cost of living and the affordability crisis, but now more indicating towards people's changed and shifting appetites. We're not talking small plates, we're talking micro meals. So it's pretty interesting to see where these items are heading, especially as adoption tips. If we're talking 25, 30% of the population on a weight loss drug, our grocery aisles and restaurant menus are going to start to shift quite dramatically. What we're talking about here is a fundamental rethinking of what food is supposed to do. And this isn't the first one. 3-4 years ago, we were talking a lot about food as medicine, the idea of people taking control of their own health and wellness through food choices. The adoption or inclusion of turmeric and everything is a really good example of food as medicine. And now what we're talking about is more on the experiential side of what food can be and is. The importance of the food experience, be it cultural transmission, sharing together, eating together, but adjusting for the fact that people might be consuming less. Interesting to see and track, but these changes are here and their effects will likely be felt larger and larger as the years progress. So every year we do a food prediction from apples to the end of pizza to honey cup squash to all these different types that we've done year over year. We have quite a large hit rate, but why we to do it is because we think this conversation is a way to encapsulate so many of the shifts in society and culture that we're talking about by understanding what is likely to be popular in the year ahead. Pizza drove to popularity not just because it's delicious, but because of the way that it exemplified how we were sharing our lives visually. The circle really pops in an age of the square, right? But others have moved forward on that. And we think that the humble mango, the king of fruits, really does encapsulate most of the trends that we're seeing. There's very little mango production in the US, but there is global mango production. So think about the realignment of global trade. The mango does a great job of exemplifying that. It's not static, right? The experience of peeling and eating mango contains movement, is visual, does much better in video than it does in a static image. So the move from Instagram to TikTok you'll see there, but also the ways in which people discern themselves through knowledge, if you know type culture. There are hundreds of varietals of mango available, and how to get them, where to get them is definitely a status signal. Oh, you have a grocery store Alfonso? Like, call me when you get a Quasar. Let me know when your mangoes have been tree ripened in India and have only been off the tree for 48 hours. Then we can talk about mangoes. And the discussion continues. So you'll see the flavors show up more, but it's more the concept and ideas behind them. And lastly, relating to the ideas of affordable luxuries and small treat culture that you might have been hearing about over the past couple of years. You can get a 99-cent mango or you can get a $3 mango. And you will see people upgrading and choosing to improve the quality of that mango experience, because it is one of those smaller, affordable luxuries. Looking forward to hopefully continue the conversation. If there's anything of interest, we'll be back next year in 2027 with the next set of themes to better understand. Thank you, everyone.